When the summer and fall of 2010 rolled around, we were at a bit of a crossroads. Our influence on shifting discipline policy and successfully elevating the push-out crisis nationally had put Cadre and the Dignity in Schools campaign on the map. There was a moment where we could have just capitalized on the attention. But complacency is not who we are. Our work became part of a national wave of calls for discipline data to be disaggregated as much as possible, but especially by race and gender. And for the first time in the trajectory of the struggle for educational justice, discipline data was coming out almost voluntarily from districts, states, and the federal government. There was a surprising appetite for this data. In retrospect, it was a data point that was a lot easier to move the needle on than standardized test scores. Since Cadre had already been collecting data, we anticipated the headlines that would come from it. Unsurprisingly, the data showed that racial disparities in school discipline, especially for Black students and their families, were extremely wide, even more so if you add in gender. We had already been sounding the alarm for several years. To stay ahead of this wave, we remained focused on piercing the veil of implementation of the SWPBIS policy we had won in 2007. We began experimenting with making demands of and garnering commitments from specific administrators inside LA Unified and specific administrators at certain South LA schools. Again, as always, this was done so that our parents, especially our Black parents, could have what we called handles to hold onto and use as leverage to stop their children from being pushed out. In the meantime, all of these new layers of possibilities that we were creating for parents to hold schools accountable in ways that would finally address the long-ignored issues of racially biased behavioral stereotypes and punitive social control in schools. Well, they challenged our parent leadership development model to go beyond campaign participation and the parent empowerment that we were facilitating in the academy. We needed to tie these two strands together somehow. A sharper vision for our parent leadership development was beginning to come into focus. Intentional capacity building was a big part. Inspired by the Public Allies Los Angeles program, which placed and trained fellows at Cadre who often became Cadre staff, we designed what we called our Catalyst program, a 5-month intensive bilingual apprenticeship model to advance our core parent leaders' development in a comprehensive way, really honing in on self-reflection, political education, collaboration, and one-to-one coaching. It was an intense journey, and we only ran this program once, in the winter and spring of 2011. But it would influence our next decade of experimenting with ways to design a rigorous, transformative parent leadership model that would be accessible and empowering for marginalized Black and Brown parents to impact systemic social change while also advocating for their own children. It was a season of experimenting, to say the least. Parallel to piloting our Catalyst program, we also piloted our bilingual e-Power program, another short-term, one-time effort to bridge the well-documented digital divide among South LA parents, in the hopes that it would supplement their empowerment process with some concrete capacity to advocate using technology. While we also only did this once, it paid dividends when a couple of new parents who came to Cadre through e-Power ended up becoming vital, incredibly important core leaders in the history of Cadre. Meanwhile, our core parent leaders were still redefining parent power. Immediately after our shadow report release in June 2010, we had started to meet every month with Dr. George McKenna, who at the time was the superintendent of the local administrative region that covered most of South LA. We expected the tension, but as our parents always wanted, they were at the table to change the conversation, to keep it real, and to be part of the solution. With patience and determination from all sides, we broke through those initial challenging moments and built enough trust and shared interest to begin reviewing discipline data with the local district staff every month. It allowed us to have shared discussions about where SWPBIS implementation gaps persisted. Not surprisingly, it was in the commitment to regularly monitoring discipline data and identifying teachers who needed support. Definitely, it required going beyond a few announcements at faculty meetings and good behavior student assemblies. We met our campaign benchmark that year when we secured an agreement from Dr. McKenna to issue a directive to all of his schools stating his targeted, time-sensitive goals for reducing suspensions and office referrals overall, but also the racial disparities for Black students, which we viewed as a way to catalyze full implementation of the SWPBIS policy. And in a win for us, he also agreed to name that his partnership with Cadre and Public Counsel guided the formation of the directive. This was important to us as we wanted all South LA schools to recognize Cadre when our parents showed up to the table. Before we knew it, we had to braid even more strands of work into our model. The Dignity in Schools campaign, or DSC for short, was really gaining momentum. After lovingly reorienting our attorney allies to center parents and young people from grassroots community organizing groups and federal policy advocacy, we started organizing 1 to 2 days at the Capitol events every year. 1 dozen, then 2 dozen organizations, including Cadre, started meeting with legislators and department leadership in Washington, D.C. annually. All of a sudden, as Rosalind Broadnax would say, Cadre went national. But we were also saying repeatedly, inspired by our sister ally Joyce Parker from Mississippi, that there is no national without the local. DSC and our LA chapter started to have an identity and presence that would shape a lot of what Cadre became, what the national movement to end the school-to-prison pipeline became. Cadre began to operate at multiple levels simultaneously. We strived to create our own opportunities to attack the school push-out crisis from as many angles as possible, and every 2 to 3 years we focused on new levers to pull. By the fall of 2011, LA Unified had to contend with responding to a civil rights investigation by the U.S. Department of Education, which highlighted the disproportionality of African American students who were suspended. The department expected the district to respond with a plan to eliminate this disproportionality. This led us and our partners at Public Counsel to negotiate with the district to unravel the harm caused by suspensions specifically for willful defiance, an incredibly subjective, often racially biased classification for removing students. It was the source of most suspensions of Black students and reflected the thread we had to unravel. If we could eliminate this suspension category, we would go a long way towards reducing racial disparities in suspensions. We kept it quiet because it was such a significant proposition at the time, but we were slowly strategizing behind the scenes. It did not pay off immediately, but it laid the groundwork for a later victory. We filed another public records request in order to uncover how schools were reporting suspension numbers, which were incongruent with what our parents were observing in school offices. It also was the year we deepened narrative, explicitly linking suspensions, truancy citations, and school-based arrests as a continuum of human rights violations by schools, leading to push-out. They were all part of the same ideology, as was the practice of over-reliance on school police to resolve behavioral issues. With our allies in DSC LA, we successfully supported the community rights campaign of the Labor Community Strategy Center in securing a significant curtailing of truancy tickets by LA school police. 2012 started off with heartbreak. Our co-founder Rosalinda Hill and her husband and coordinator Kenneth Hill had moved out of state to secure a safer living environment for their family. In January of 2012, Linda succumbed to her years-long battle with breast cancer. It was also Cadre's 10th anniversary year, so it was both sobering while being a profound reminder of Linda's embodiment of parent power. Even though she could not be active with Cadre after 2006, she, along with Kenny, had modeled the type of unconditional love for parents that was at the root of Cadre's founding values. We acknowledged Linda posthumously at our 10th anniversary celebration. Accepting the award were Kenny and 2 of her children. Linda is undoubtedly one of our guardians, resting in power. We will always be because she was here. One of the things that was trending upwards between 2010 and 2013 were the number of requests that Cadre was receiving to partner on collaborative projects that would result in studies, reports, and toolkits. If they were strategic and helped us continue to shift the narrative on school discipline, school push-out, and the school-to-prison pipeline, especially on disparities for Black families, we said yes. Looking back, we kept adding projects that took incredible determination to not just complete, but to center our parents' growth and development while we did so. One of those projects culminated in the spring of 2012. In close partnership with human impact partners, we produced the first Health Impact Assessment, or HIA, on exclusionary school discipline, meaning school discipline based on removal and punishment, taking students away from learning and development. This study was also on the impact of school-wide positive behavioral interventions and supports on improving those negative health outcomes. It was a big step for Cadre, as it was a gateway to engaging sectors beyond education and broadening concern and support for ending the school-to-prison pipeline as a way of impacting the social determinants of health. And most importantly, it was aligned with the human rights framework, which is based on intersectionality and the interdependence of all sectors to improve outcomes in any one sector. And that upward trend continued throughout the next year. Our work at the national level resulted in a new model school discipline code to provide school districts with rigorous templates to institutionalize child-centered, positive, restorative, and developmentally sound school discipline. Other national networks put forward state-level policy guides which were informed by our work. With DSC and other national alliances, we humbly but boldly offered perspective in the wake of the mass school shooting in Newtown, Connecticut. We implored policymakers, school leaders, and thought leaders to guard against a reactionary approach to school safety that would entail increased surveillance, weaponry, and police on school campuses, as this would disproportionately be implemented in places like South LA. We implored them to focus instead on root causes and solutions, including mental health, healing, and restorative justice. It would be the beginning, unfortunately, of a series of responses that we would have to issue repeatedly. Our successes locally laid the groundwork for 5 new California state laws related to school discipline, including 2 focused on alternatives to suspensions and suspensions as a last resort. That success generated momentum for our first attempt to eliminate willful defiance suspensions through state law. It also led to a unique 2-year partnership with another region in the state that had the worst expulsion rates in California and was vastly different politically from Los Angeles. We were honored to get to work with the Dolores Huerta Foundation as they anchored the Kern Educational Justice Coalition. We traveled from LA to Bakersfield once a month to share as much as we could about how we centered parents and parent organizing in our campaigns. We brought our parent leaders to meet their parent leaders, all of whom were migrant farm workers discovering that the school-to-prison pipeline operated just as rampantly in small towns across South Kern County. As always, Dolores Huerta herself was at the table, strategizing, translating for parents whenever needed. There is no national without the local. There is no statewide without the local. Decriminalizing and humanizing South LA schools in real terms was still the measure of our success, and so it was vital that we continue to monitor. School suspensions were still happening in de facto, unofficial ways, and we did not want to take our eyes off the prize. Transforming discipline was, in our eyes, the pathway to the transformation of our education system, and a necessary condition for racial equity and justice. By 2013, it was clear that we had, as Rosalind Broadnax often says, through patience, passion, and persistence, turned the stories that we had started collecting in 2002 and the decisions that our core parents made in 2004 into a framework for parent-centered organizing, capacity building, leadership development, policy advocacy, and movement building, which enabled us to stay true to our North Star goal of dismantling the school-to-prison pipeline. We were too narrowly focused for some. There were so many reform efforts that Cadre was being called to bring our parents into. Often it was assumed that we would move on, given our many layers of success. To everyone, we seemed well positioned to impact the broader system of education, be it electorally, on governance matters, or budgetary matters. And we did in fact dabble and participate in some broader efforts just to see what we could impact. But there was something about the ability to be independent, to not pressure ourselves to be all things to all people, to stay laser focused on the school-to-prison pipeline, and on parents spearheading its dismantling, on sharpening our bottom line of disrupting and eliminating anti-Blackness in schools, be it towards students, parents, or entire communities. It filled a gap, one that many were reluctant to fill or stay filling. It was often more practical to find the next victory. It was less practical to activate grassroots parents around monitoring, investing in their own capacity building, building Black and brown solidarity, without a clear policy victory in sight. But a reason for our approach usually appeared in due time. It was precisely because of this laser focus that Kadri was able to join the Brothers Sons Selves coalition of youth organizing groups in early 2013 as a strategic partner. This allowed us to bring all of our experience to bear on an opportunity to transform LA Unified even more dramatically. We helped strategize, edit the policy resolution, move school board members, prepare youth and parent leaders to engage the media, and mobilize turnout on the day of the board vote. What became the School Climate Bill of Rights that LA Unified adopted in May 2013 included numerous new policies that changed school discipline practices for good. Namely, and finally, the history-making elimination of willful defiance suspensions, along with a district-wide commitment to implement restorative practices in every school, more rigorous implementation of SWPBIS, reduction in school police involvement and behavioral intervention, more data collection, and a complaint mechanism if none of this was being implemented, and with parents and high school students involved in committees. It was another victory bell that rang across the country. Soon, districts across multiple states had to begin responding to demands from their grassroots parents and youth to also eliminate willful defiance suspensions, to implement restorative justice as an alternative, and to invest in student support like counselors instead of more policing. Tune in to our next video when we discuss how both our organizing model and movement building matured from 2013 to 2016 into a thought leadership role we never expected but humbly accepted.